and we are following what it looks like when Donald Trump calls in an indictment, which he publicly did, a Nixonian admission that he wanted someone he opposes or doesn't like to be charged, James Comey. That individual has been charged, and today it turns to court. It's really happening. The former FBI director appeared in court for the first time since the DOJ indictment. So this is the beginning of the case. This is the beginning, if you will, of the process that leads to a trial if the case holds and isn't tossed before then. He pled not guilty today to the charges of lying to Congress back in 2020 around issues that stem all the way back to Trump's first term. It's a pivotal moment in how this DOJ has continued to bend to things that we know from the public record its own prosecutors and internal staff appointed by Trump thought were wrong, bending to things that they didn't want to do, sometimes having to change staff, Trump ousting the prosecutor there in order to get what he sees as his revenge indictments. Now, Comey's long been the subject of clashing with Trump, all the way back to how he did what he and others saw as his job. And remember, these issues have long already been investigated. They've been reviewed by the DOJ's internal process. They were reviewed by a prosecutor handpicked by Trump, John Durham, and other reviews. None of this, whatever one thinks of it, has ever been seen by any other prior process to involve any misconduct of a criminal nature by James Comey. And yet that is what Trump demanded be charged and what got charged. So we take a look back at a history that goes all the way to Trump's first presidential campaign.
The FBI director told Congress he is investigating
whether there was any coordination between people associated with the Trump campaign and the Russians.
The FBI, James Comey, has been fired.
Look, I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope they're tapes. Led to the indictment of dozens of people. The head of Trump's campaign was a grave counterintelligence threat.
Former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are under criminal investigation.
In the Trump era, I've been investigated a lot, audited a lot, and so it's not my first rodeo.
Former FBI Director James Comey has just been indicted on 2 counts.
There are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees.
The last statement there was Comey's video presentation, a kind of video public accounting for what he says are the costs of opposing Donald Trump. And let's call it like it is. Let's be straight. James Comey has been controversial on the left, right, and center for a bunch of stuff. But nobody who honestly has reviewed him or criticized him, and he has been criticized for his leadership, for his approach to the FBI on this and other newscasts, but nobody who seriously looked at this thought there were crimes there. Remember, there's no new evidence that we've seen yet. If they have new criminal evidence, we'll report on it. But all of this goes back to him testifying to Congress about prior activities regarding talking to the press, press releases, press leaks, right? An authorized statement versus a leak. But none of that has ever led, as I remind you, to anything that anyone thought was a crime, including Donald Trump's hand-picked prosecutor, John Durham. So it's important to keep that in mind, because whatever Comey's popularity, all of the evidence that we have in public suggests this is the old stuff that even Trump's people didn't think amounted to evidence to charge, that now is being charged because the president phoned it in, possibly unlawfully, possibly illegally. The indictment related to that history was not brought in the normal course by the normal prosecutor. One prosecutor ousted, another brought in, and before she had what any lawyer would tell you is enough time to go through the facts and the evidence and the case and the witnesses, she just rushed in for a deadline and charged it. And no one else would sign their name next to what she put. The Times reports 2 prosecutors in North Carolina now been assigned to the case because she had, quote, a hard time getting anyone in her new office to help. Think about what the Times is reporting. Her new office is in the Trump administration. These are all Trump people, but many of them say it's not a real case. You might violate your legal duties to pursue it, or they don't want to be a part of a clunker that could turn into a loser. She did not speak in court today. She was reportedly in her chair nodding when a junior prosecutor represented the department. She was the only prosecutor to sign the indictment. I'll remind you of that, like I said there. And the indictment itself doesn't have a lot of evidence. It's 2 pages. It's about congressional testimony. Comey's team is out there going on offense today, and with all due respect, they have a legal team, several DOJ lawyers with far more experience than the new prosecutor that Trump called in. They say they haven't even been given real specifics on the charges, that they are going at the whole case, seeking its dismissal, and they're going to use Trump's words against him, saying that they have evidence to prove, and these aren't just any random defense lawyers. These are some very skilled, decorated DOJ veterans, one who worked as a Republican, Fitzgerald, investigating high-level matters. They say they can prove, they think, that it's a, quote, vindictive and selective prosecution. They also say this new hand-picked prosecutor might have problems of validity. The government doesn't have a lot of details, but they claim they need more time to introduce what they call classified evidence. The judge already, on this first day leading the trial, quote, skeptical of the claim that the nature of this, remember, we're talking about public testimony about issues that have been discussed for years. If this weren't so important, some people might say, I'm a little tired of stories about the Clintons and James Comey. But of course, this is Trump's revenge tour. This is what he wants everyone to focus on. And the judge is skeptical that there's going to be new classified evidence. The Times said it kind of projected an air of polite impatience on the first day of Trump team's effort to prosecute the former FBI director. Quote, this does not appear to me to be an overly complicated case, the judge added, again striking at the obvious. There isn't a ton of new evidence against the director. What there is old evidence that was previously dismissed, found lacking by perfectly motivated Trump appointees who, had they had the case before, would have presumably been willing to bring it. Indeed, they take an oath to bring cases that are supported by the evidence. Now, a new prosecutor, lonely in her office, doing Trump's bidding, and today seemingly outgunned by some of the more experienced counsel against her, is going to try to take the director to trial. That trial, if there is no intervening event, will be set for January. We're joined by Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and Mueller pro prosecutor. Welcome.
Nice to be here.
Let's start with the little bit of new. We did hear for the first time from a judge assessing what is a very thin slice of this, because we're not at trial. What did you make of the judge's reception today?
Well, what he was responding to was the first of what I believe will be many efforts by the government to slow the case down. They were clearly not doing what normally a prosecutor does, which is like, we're ready for trial, let's go, let's set a date. Remember, this is the so-called rocket docket. Yep. And so the government said, Judge, you should delay the trial because it's complex. Under something called the speedy trial rules, if you declare something complex, the government's given more time. A false statement case, which is 2 counts, is very unlikely to be a complex case, and that's what the judge is reacting to. But the news here, the sort of the import of it, is the government is going to be, and I think this is going to be the first of many efforts by them to slow the case down. Yeah. If they don't have a winning hand, that any day that the case is not dismissed or they do not lose the case at trial is a good day for the government. This is an unusual position for the government to be in. And I thought they looked very weak today in a false statement case, showing up and saying, Judge, please delay the case because it's complex. I mean, that felt facially not terribly plausible.
Right. You're saying that alone makes them look bad. And on simple cases, this is clearly a simple case. It's not a RICO case. It's not a bunch of organizational evidence. It's a couple of discrete facts, as the judge said. And as you know, having been a prosecutor, Andrew, there's a bit of what they sometimes call the Lauryn Hill rule, where confident prosecutors say, ready or not, here I come, you can't hide. And you're telling us we're getting the opposite from the Trump prosecutor, saying, I need more time. I'm basically not ready. And maybe they are a little bit afraid. They're the ones hiding from what this could ultimately look like. With that in mind, you can say, OK, Weissman said this. The news anchor said that. What about more Republican veterans of the DOJ? Here was new from Andrew McCarthy, well-known, I'd say pretty conservative prosecutor type. But here's what he said.
I don't believe they have a case, Bill, based on what we've seen in the indictment and what we know from the public reporting. But now we're going to find out. I just think that factually they have a very difficult time making this case.
Andrew?
I agree. And I point out just another aspect of the weakness, which is one of the things that they said to the court, the government did, is another reason to delay this case is because there's going to be so much classified information. And we're going to need to do litigation under what's called the SEPA statute, which governs how to deal with classified documents. Again, that remains to be seen, but that does not seem to be the case here, that this is going to be a case that involves lots of classified documents. So between the statement about please exclude speedy trial time and give us more time because it's complex, and the government saying, oh, there's lots of classified documents, so that's going to involve this complicated process about how to deal with classified documents. Those are both weak statements. And it's understandable because the trial team, as you noted, Ari, are not the trial team that had been on the case investigating it. They are brought in from outside. So they clearly are not ready. But that is so unusual. I want to make sure people understand. The government, when you indict a case, you need to be ready. You're only responsible.
What happens when the former head of America's premier law enforcement agency finds himself on the other side of the justice system he once led? What happens when the very mechanisms designed to ensure fair prosecution are called into question in a case that reads less like legal procedure and more like political payback? We're diving into a story that's about much more than one man's indictment. It's about whether the guardrails that protect all of us from government overreach are still functioning or whether they've been quietly dismantled while nobody was paying attention. Before we break this down, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me, do you believe the justice system can remain impartial when the people running it have publicly declared their targets? Because that question is at the absolute heart of what's unfolding in a Virginia courtroom right now. Here's where this story gets interesting in ways that go far beyond the typical former official faces charges narrative. James Comey, the man who once commanded the FBI, who briefed presidents, who made decisions that affected national security and presidential elections, is now facing criminal charges. But it's not just the charges themselves that are raising eyebrows across the legal community. It's who's prosecuting him and how they got there. Lindsay Halligan wasn't a career federal prosecutor before she was tapped to lead this case. She wasn't climbing the ranks in the Justice Department, building expertise in complex federal investigations. She was an insurance lawyer. And now she's not just prosecuting Comey, she's running the entire U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia on an interim basis. That's one of the most important federal prosecutor offices in the country, handling everything from national security cases to complex white-collar prosecutions. Comey's legal team has filed motions arguing that Halligan's appointment violates constitutional requirements and congressional statutes governing how interim U.S. attorneys are supposed to be selected. This isn't a minor procedural complaint. This goes to the fundamental question of whether the person bringing charges against you was legally empowered to do so in the first place. Think about that for a second. Imagine you're charged with a crime. You're facing potential prison time, your reputation is being destroyed, your family is under stress, your finances are being drained by legal fees, and then your lawyers discover that the prosecutor who brought the charges against you wasn't properly appointed to their position. That the normal process, the one Congress designed specifically to prevent abuse, was circumvented. How would you feel about the legitimacy of your prosecution? Comey's attorneys aren't just making a technical argument about paperwork and procedures, they're making a constitutional argument about the separation of powers and the limits of executive authority. The Constitution and federal statutes lay out specific processes for how U.S. attorneys are supposed to be appointed. These processes exist for a reason, to prevent exactly the kind of situation Comey's team says has occurred here. When the Attorney General wants to appoint an interim U.S. attorney, there are rules, there are procedures, there are limitations. These aren't arbitrary bureaucratic hurdles. They're safeguards, designed by Congress and rooted in constitutional principles to ensure that the awesome power of federal prosecution isn't wielded arbitrarily or vindictively. Comey's motion argues that these safeguards were ignored. That Halligan was defectively appointed through a process that violated the congressionally designed and constitutionally compelled means for such appointments. If that's true, and a court will have to decide whether it is, then every action she's taken, including obtaining Comey's indictment, might be legally void. The legal term for this is that the indictment would be a nullity. Not just flawed, not just problematic, completely without legal force, as if it never existed. Because Comey's team argues, no properly appointed executive branch official sought and obtained the indictment. This raises a fascinating and troubling question. In their haste to prosecute someone the president has publicly targeted for years, did the Justice Department cut corners that will ultimately doom the case? And if they did, was it incompetence or something more calculated? One of the most striking elements of Comey's filing is an exhibit 60 pages of documentation detailing statements that Comey and Trump have made about each other over the years. Think about what that document represents. It's a timeline of animosity, a record of a relationship that deteriorated from institutional to personal, from professional disagreement to open warfare.